Reviewing the basics, building an essay from sources while avoiding plagiarism. This was originally created by Worth Weller. The version I am using was edited by R.R. Barstack, and then I, Miss Bradley, have modified it for our uses here. First of all, I want to talk about the importance of following GMC's honor code. Georgia Military College's honor code states, "I will not lie, cheat, steal, nor tolerate those who do." If you are found being academically dishonest, which includes plagiarizing, for your first offense, you will fail the course and be referred to the Student Honor Council for a non-academic penalty, which is typically academic probation, and the reason why is marked on your transcript. For a second offense, this results in failure of the course and referral to the Student Honor Council for a non-academic penalty such as expulsion from the college. So how do you avoid academic dishonesty when you're working with research? Well, first of all, your essays must be your own words with your own thoughts using your own voice. That's primarily the point, is to demonstrate to your instructor and or your classmates what you have learned from this assignment, what you can add to this discussion. So when you're quoting from sources in your essays, you're doing that usually for one of two reasons: to add authority to your essay by showing how informed and well-researched your opinion is, and or to show how you arrived at that particular conclusion that you're defending. In fact, generally, the essays that you write at the college level are made up of just three parts: your own thoughts about the thing that you've read or the issue that you're studying, quotes from your textbook or other reading assignment. In the case of literature courses, it's usually the particular text, whether it's a story, poem, or play, and then quotes from outside sources, looking for scholarly sources to support your point of view. So while most of your essay is in your own words, you use quotations to support your thinking, illustrate your thinking, prove that your interpretation is correct, or reveal the weaknesses of an alternative interpretation. That's our counter argument in the literature classes. So basically, this boils down to then the same basic pattern. You're going to start and end your writing with your own voice, your own words. So the introduction and conclusion of an essay or research paper should be your own words, no quotations needed. Then in your body paragraphs, you're going to follow that same basic pattern. You're going to start and end with your own words, and your quotations then are going to go in the middle of your body paragraphs, which are in the middle of your essay. So let's break that down in terms of what a body paragraph should look like. A body paragraph should begin with a topic sentence. That's your own words, no quotations. It tells the reader, this is the point that I'm going to explore in this paragraph, without actually using the phrase, in this paragraph, I will explore. Next up, you're going to give a few sentences that pull in evidence, pull in a quotation from the text or from a scholarly source that illustrates your point, that supports that topic sentence. And then you end with your own words once again. You're showing the reader, look, this is how it all comes together. This is how it supports the point that I mentioned in my topic sentence. So a couple of rules of thumb: do not start a paragraph with a quote, do not end a paragraph with a quote, and generally speaking, for essays of this length and this complexity, you're only going to use one or two short quotes per paragraph. In Ms. Bradley's classes, you're limited to only one block quote for the whole research paper, so keep that in mind. Okay, so now that we've talked about where to put the quotes, let's talk about how to use the quotes. You may have heard this metaphor before, that a well-integrated quote is like a sandwich. A lot of instructors call this the quote sandwich method. You start with a sentence that is your own words, your own thought, your own point. Then you integrate the quote with an author tag or a signal phrase. I generally call them signal phrases. that shows how this quote relates to the point that you're trying to make. It includes your citation. And then you end with, again, your own words, your own interpretation or explanation of the quote that you just gave us. So that's a quote sandwich. The bun on the top and bottom, the thing that holds everything together, that's your own words. The quote, the signal phrase, that's the stuff in the middle that, yeah, that meat might taste really good, but without the bun, you've got really gross, messy hands, right? Don't give us a gross, messy paragraph. Be sure to give us the bun on the top and the bottom. So, another way to think of this, other than the quote sandwich metaphor, is what I call the ICE method. And you may see some other videos and handouts online for this method as well. It's about as popular as the quote sandwich. So, you're going to see me comment on your work, ICE this quote. By ICE, I mean integrate it with a signal phrase or an author tag. Then cite it, give an MLA format, in-text citation. That's how we avoid plagiarism. That's how we avoid academic dishonesty. And then finally, don't just run away. You've got to explain what that quote adds to your paragraph. Explain why did you pick that quote out of the whole story or out of that whole scholarly article. What is so important about this quote? Or other times, like in your counter argument paragraph where you're exploring another point of view, you might want to evaluate that evidence. Evaluate it and tell us what's weak about it. Why is it not as good as your argument and your evidence? And if you want a good 90s earworm to help you remember to ice your quotes, then you got to check out my Ice Ice Baby video. It's embarrassing. It's lame, but I pretty much guarantee it will help you remember to integrate, cite, and explain your quotations and avoid academic dishonesty. So let's look at an example. This is an example of a paragraph that gives us a strong iced quote that follows the quote sandwich method. All right, I'm going to read the whole paragraph and then we'll look at the parts of it. Midway into his famous I Have a Dream speech before 100,000 rapt listeners on a scorching hot day on the Washington Mall, King answered critics who asked why he was not satisfied with the civil rights gains at the time by detailing a litany of unjust public behavior towards African Americans, ranging from police brutality to disenfranchisement at the voting booth. He sang out in his preacher's voice, quote, "We will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream," end quote, parentheses 304, end parentheses, period. It was this stunning metaphor of running water and others like it that catapulted King into national respect and prominence. So let's look at the elements we have here. We started with our own words, a sentence that is our own ideas, that is establishing what we're going to talk about. Then we have the quote that is integrated and cited. We have the signal phrase / author tag, he sang out in his preacher's voice. So in other words, we could have just put he said, but that's going to get pretty boring, right? So try to come up with synonyms or more descriptive ways to say the same thing. He proclaimed, he stated, he emphatically declared, right? Give us something original that tells us who and what this quote is. Then put quotation marks around the exact words and phrases that come from your original source and end with an MLA style citation. So the basics, and we're going to talk about this in more detail shortly. For MLA citations, you give the author's last name and the page number. This source just used the page number 304 because this entire essay, the only source was Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech. Therefore, they used the author's name the first time and not the rest of the time. For an essay like the one you'll be doing where you're using multiple sources and at least one text, you'll want to use the author's name in your citation each time. Then the final sentence tells us, okay, What was this about? Explains why we picked this particular quote. It was this stunning metaphor and others like it that gave him his um, public recognition. Okay, you might be saying now, okay, but how do I know what's important enough to quote? If you're only going to let me have 1 or 2 quotes per paragraph, how do I choose? Well, here are some general guidelines. First and foremost, quote sparingly. Keep your quotes short to the most memorable, most important language that you've got. All right. If you are quoting something and it takes up 4 or more lines in your document, then you need to treat that as a block quote, and we'll deal with that later. If you're in Miss Bradley's class, then you only get 1 block quote per research paper or essay, so keep that in mind. If you have something that's longer and you've already used your block quote, but you still just can't edit out any more of it, you need the whole thing, then what you can do is instead of presenting it as one big chunk of block quote, you can break it up using multiple signal phrases and author tags into multiple sentences so that it is fully integrated without just being a block of text. Down at the bottom of the screen, I have an example. Yada yada, the author wrote, offering justification for his actions, period. Yada yada yada, he added, right? So you could repeat that kind of structure up to, I would say, 3 or 4 times maximum to break your block quote up into multiple sentences without having to give us a block quote. So rule number 2, you want to quote just the good stuff, the most memorable part of what the author is saying. This is great when you come across an authority, a scholarly source, that they just hit the nail on the head. They couldn't have explained it any more clearly. That's something that you know you're going to want to quote. Another time you may want to quote something directly is if the statement that's being made is particularly controversial and you want to make it clear that you're not misinterpreting what they're saying, but this is literally what they said, or if what's being said is something that you distinctly strongly disagree with. So you want to represent that as a direct quote to make sure your audience knows this is what that other author thought, not what you thought. And then finally, rule number 3, you can paraphrase anything else. If you can change the words of that source without changing the meaning or the impact of what they're saying, if it helps it flow better within your own ideas, if it's not controversial and it's not easily misunderstood, those are all good signs that you can paraphrase it instead of quoting it. Now, here's the important part. Just because you are paraphrasing it, aka putting it in your own words, does not mean you stop there. It is still someone else's idea, it's someone else's intellectual property. So you need to make sure that you still put an in-text citation to show whose idea this was. The lack of quotation marks shows us that you put it into your own words, you paraphrased it, but you still have to have that citation and give credit where it's due to show whose idea it was. So let's look at an example of how to work a paraphrase and a quotation into your argument. So to make sure the text here was large enough to see, I did not include the topic sentence, but we're going to read over it and then identify the paraphrased material and the quoted material. King brought the crowd to a cheering roar like the sound of a great cataract when he asserted that the promise of Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation had not yet been fulfilled, parentheses 303, end parentheses, period. Quote, 100 years later, the Negro is still anguished in the corners of American society and finds himself in exile in his own land, end quote, he stated, parentheses 303, end parentheses, period. King noted that the purpose of the giant gathering on the Mall was to illustrate the exact conditions across the South that made the African Americans feel like exiles. Okay, so which one of these took what the author, King, said and put it into their own words? Yep, this one, the first one, is a paraphrase. When he asserted that the promise of Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation had not yet been fulfilled, that is a paraphrase or summary of King's argument. This part is our quotation. You'll notice the citations are the same. We still need to show who said this idea. In this example, the only source used is King's I Have a Dream speech. So they didn't use King's name at the end of every citation. In your writing, you're going to be working with multiple sources, so you will use the author's name each time. Okay? Now, you'll notice that the paraphrase starts with the author being named in the signal phrase. King brought the crowd to a cheering roar, and so it would make sense not to duplicate that inside the in-text citation. On the other one, because they used the generic he pronoun, then if there were mixed sources here, King would need to be included in parentheses to have a correct citation. Okay, let's move on. So here are some examples of signal phrases that use author tags. According to, as so-and-so goes on to explain, characterized by so-and-so, the topic is, one critic points out, so-and-so believes that, so-and-so claims that, and the words of so-and-so. There are tons of great signal phrases that you can find, for example, at the Purdue University's online writing lab in the quote sandwich handout in our class in Moodle. And then here are some additional verbs that you can use to give variety to your signal phrases. So-and-so acknowledges, believes, comments, declares, or so-and-so denies, so-and-so refutes, rejects, responds. So you have verbs that help give clarity to the idea and how it relates to the point that you're trying to make in your paper. Okay, so just to recap, in MLA format, your in-text citation is generally going to look like one of these four examples. Okay, with all of them, you'll notice that the period goes after the citation, not at the end of the quote or paraphrase, but after the citation. That way, the period holds the citation to the idea. Does that make sense? If we put the period before the citation, that citation is just kind of floating there hanging out. We want to put the period after the citation so that it's clear what idea or quotation it belongs to. When possible, you want to use the author's last name and the number of the page as your in-text citation. A lot of times with online research, even in the GMC library databases, because the texts are only available as transcriptions and not PDFs, there's not going to be a page number, so you just use the author's last name. If there is no author given, which is sometimes the case with some of the literary analysis databases or some of the databases that offer pros and cons of controversial issues, it'll be a group or corporate author. In that case, then you will put the title of the article, the title of the source in quotation marks and page number if available, or just the title of the source in quotation marks if there's no page number available. And again, with all of these, the period goes after the citation. So some general reminders about MLA style formatting. The entire document should be Times New Roman, size 12, and double spaced. The easiest thing to do is either download one of the sample documents from Ms. Bradley's course in Moodle, or the first thing you do before you type a single word is go ahead and change the font, change the size, change the spacing, and make sure that in the newer version of Word, you actually select remove space after paragraph to make sure you don't end up with funky spacing in your heading or in your works cited page especially. So the next thing you'll want to do on your document is you'll want to set up the header. To do that, you go to View, Header and Footer, or Insert Header, and you're going to make sure that you right align that. You enter your last name, and then you insert the page number. If you type the number 1 here, the number 1 will be on every page, which is not very helpful. So make sure you actually click on Insert Page Number. All right. And then next up, we have the heading of your document. Most instructors, myself included, do not use a cover page. Instead, we just want the following heading information on the first 4 lines of the first page of your document, and only on the first page. Your name, your instructor's name, the class name, and the due date, in that order. After that, you can put a title if the assignment calls for a title. And then after you're done with your final concluding paragraph, you're going to insert a page break to go to the top of the next page and type works cited. All right, the works cited is where you put the full MLA citation for your sources, and we'll go over some reminders about that as we get closer to your first research-based assignment. But it's important to remember that this goes on a page all by itself, same document, same Word file. It's just not sitting right below your last paragraph. It's going to be on a page by itself. You're going to list your citations in alphabetical order and use a hanging indent, which is the opposite of a normal paragraph. So let's look at an example of what this looks like. There are plenty more examples available online, and I have sample documents available for you in Moodle, but here's just a quick overview of MLA formatting. At the top, I've got a picture of an MLA style first page of the document with the header, the student's last name and page number, the heading, student's name, instructor's name, class name, due date, title, and then a normal paragraph indentation where the first line is indented and everything else is on the margin. The image at the bottom is an example of an MLA style works cited page. You'll notice that this is on a page by itself. It happens to be page 7 of this document, so it is the page after their final paragraph. Works cited is centered on the first line, and then the sources are listed in alphabetical order using a hanging indent. So the first line of each citation is on the margin, and if it goes on to a second or third line, that is indented. And for my students, I also have instructions for how to do this using the current version of Word posted for you guys in Moodle. All right, so let's recap just the basics, right? This is the most important stuff, letting go of the details for now. Number 1, keep your quotes short. You're only going to quote the good stuff. Everything else you can paraphrase or put into your own words. Regardless of whether you quote or paraphrase, you've still got to ice it. We still got to use a quote sandwich so we don't get, hamburger grease on our hands, right? So use author tags, signal phrases to integrate it. Give your in-text citations to avoid plagiarism, and then in your own words, explain or evaluate that quotation. As a reminder, do not start or end with quotations. Don't start or end a paragraph with a quotation. Don't start or end your essay with a quotation. Use MLA document formatting for the whole document. If you follow these guidelines, then you'll avoid academic dishonesty. Let me know if you have any questions.